Joining us on the line is Josh Rogin. He's columnist for the Global Opinion section of the Washington Post, political analyst with CNN. He's also the author of Chaos Under Heaven, Trump, Xi, and the Battle for the 21st Century. It's available wherever books are sold right now. The book is well worth the read. Josh, thanks so much for joining the show. Good to talk to you.
Great to be back.
So let's talk about the situation with Russia and Ukraine. It seems like, frankly, everybody is sort of boxed in. And when I mean everybody, I mean kind of everybody. So the West has now levied the harshest sanctions we have seen in our lifetime on a major world power like Russia. Vladimir Putin is already too deep in to pull out at this point. The Ukrainians aren't in a position to be making widespread concessions to the Russians. So it seems like the most possible outcome here is just a sort of stagnation in which Russia continues to exert heavy military pressure. The West continues to exert heavy economic pressure. Russia eventually takes over the governance of Ukraine, installs some sort of puppet, and then we end up with a 10 to 20-year civil war in the middle of Europe.
Well, that's definitely one scenario that might play out, Ben. But here's what I would say. You know, some of us are more boxed in than the others. I talked to the mayor of Kharkiv. Okay, he's literally boxed in. Yep. He's in a bunker. Bombs are exploding around him while he's doing our interview. And what he said is that, no, this is not over. This future is not written, that what Ukrainians do today, tomorrow, next week, and next month matters. And what the international community, including the United States government, does today, tomorrow, and next month matters. And that's what I believe, is that this is not a preordained thing. All that we've learned about Putin's army over the last 2 weeks is that he doesn't understand exactly how it works. We don't understand exactly how it works. These battles are not won or lost by numbers or by brute force or by economic sanctions or oligarch yachts or any of that nonsense that we waste all of our time talking about. And I went to the Munich Security Conference and they were debating this oligarch or that oligarch sanction. That doesn't matter to the people who are getting shelled. They need weapons, they need food, they need medicine, they need first aid equipment for first responders. And we're slow to give them all of those things. And that's what will make the difference in this war. Now, if we look at the history, sure, yes, Grozny, Syria, that's the pattern. What we know is that they're willing to make a desert and call it peace. They're willing to flatten the entire Ukrainian landscape and then build it back slowly in their mold. And that would be the worst case scenario. What I'm saying is that let's think outside the box on this thing. And without getting American troops involved on the ground and without unnecessarily riding the escalation ladder up to World War III, there are many things we can do right now that we're not doing that would save lives and give the Ukrainians a fighting chance, which is all that they're really asking for.
So let's talk about some of those things. You mentioned military aid, medical aid. Now, obviously, the West has placed a lot of credence in sanctions. Sanctions historically have not actually changed the actions of foreign actors. Sanctions against Iran didn't stop Iran from pursuing terrorism all over the world. Sanctions, generally speaking, unless you have like a complete wartime blockade, which we don't actually have against Russia, considering that it has outlets in China, considering we're still buying Russian oil like literally right now, this is not a complete wartime blockade that is likely to change Vladimir Putin's behavior in Ukraine. So as you say, really it's just the facts on the ground in Ukraine that could change, and that can only happen if we continue to supply extraordinary levels of material. How long is the window where we can continue to supply that material, given the fact that Russia seems to be experiencing difficulties up north near Kyiv? They've been experiencing additional successes down south.
Right. Well, we don't know, but the best time to do it was yesterday, and the best time to do it is today, and that third best time to do it is tomorrow. In other words, since we don't know, let's do it now as much as we can. And, I have to take issue with your premise that sanctions don't work. Of course, in places like Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, sanctions didn't solve the problem, that's for sure. But it's not to say they had no effect. Imagine if we had never had sanctions, those countries would be acting a lot differently over the years. So it's just to say that sanctions aren't a panacea. And because here in Washington, all we do is pray to the god of sanctions. It makes it into this mythical tool that's supposed to solve all of our problems, and then we're always disappointed. What I'm saying is that sanctions are only relevant as part of a real strategy that includes all of the other tools of national power and influence. And because the Biden administration, frankly, doesn't want to use those tools and has been resisting calls to use those tools for months and months and months until the bombs started to fall. And the Europeans, too, by the way, were even worse in some regard. They lean on this sanctions thing to make ourselves feel good about doing something. They have some effect. They'll have a little bit of effect, but they're not going to stop the bombs from falling. So how long do we have to stop the bombs from falling? Well, as long as they continue to fall. In other words, if this is going to be a 20-year fight, then we're going to have to stay in it for 20 years and support these brave people who just want freedom, democracy, agency, sovereignty, prosperity, and all the things that we take for granted in every way that we can without starting World War III. And hopefully, if we do it more, then the war will be shorter. And if we do it less, then the war will be longer. The worst case scenario example is Syria. Look at Syria. Russian atrocities for 7 years, We helped them for a little while, then we stopped because we got tired of it. And now it's the hell on earth. It's North Korea in the Middle East. Do we want a North Korea in Europe? That's what Ukraine will be if we don't do more right now.
So, Josh, let's talk about, let's try to separate this off into sort of three discussions. There's sort of the before, what we could have done to prevent this. Then there's the now, which we're discussing. And then there is the future as to sort of where this goes and what are the spillover effects of this particular conflict. So let's start from the before. So it's been my contention that the West's basic failure to appreciate Russian ambition over the course of the past 30 years, basically since the end of the Cold War, has led to this moment. That when you do nothing after Georgia, when you do nothing after the invasion of Crimea, when you try to bring Russia into the quote-unquote family of nations, while Russia is acting in direct opposition to many of the interests of the West in places like Syria, all you did was cause Vladimir Putin to miscalculate. You actually gave him the impetus to miscalculate, and that particularly exacerbated in the last year or so when you had Joe Biden. I mean, 2 months ago, Joe Biden was literally at a press conference saying openly that if it was a minor incursion, there might not be any sort of NATO agreement on what to do. So if you're Vladimir Putin at that point and you're looking for some sort of capper to your career, you can see why he would say, okay, well, you know what? I think Ukraine's going to be a pushover. I don't think it's going to look like Afghanistan because, frankly, I think most people in Ukraine kind of like me. And so I'm just going to walk in and the West ain't going to do anything. So it seems to me miscalculation and a generalized failure by the West, and this is true not just for Russia, but generally, to appreciate that other nations do not have the same set of rational considerations that we do. They're not seeking the same thing, which is sort of nicer stuff, that this led to the moment that we are now in.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that point. And, there'll be plenty of time to look back, but let's just take a minute to do that right now. 2008, Russia attacked Georgia. George W. Bush flew U.S. Air Force planes on a quote-unquote humanitarian mission, landed them at the Tbilisi airport. Putin told him to take them away. He said, absolutely not. He then sent our Secretary of State to stand with those planes. So if the Russians wanted to take Tbilisi, they were going to have to kill our Secretary of State. Guess what? Putin turned back. A few months later, Obama and Clinton come in, and we got the reset. Okay, that was the signal. The basic stance of both the Obama and Biden administration is that we can reset relations or have what Biden would say is stable and predictable relations with Russia. And it didn't work. It still doesn't work. 2014, just like you said, you're absolutely right. Same message. They took parts of Ukraine, no consequences. And with all dictators, the appetite grows with the eating. Now, there were several other mistakes in the large battle between autocracies and democracies that we're pretending to fight. Hong Kong, right there. You let Hong Kong go. That's a signal to the dictators that we don't care. Afghanistan, bungled, right there. Of course, that's a signal to Putin that we're not going to do anything. And you say he miscalculated. Maybe he calculated correctly because as of December, senior Biden administration officials, and this is news, were telling Hill staffers that we couldn't give Stinger missiles to the Ukrainians because they couldn't handle them. They couldn't absorb them. And that's what senior Biden officials were saying. I have that firsthand from those congressional officials who heard it from their lips. And now they're like, oh, yeah, we're giving them all the Stingers. So obviously they changed their minds, but it's almost too late. It's not too late, but it's almost too late. So there's a historical lesson here, which is that totalitarian, expansionist, aggressive, repressive, autocratic dictators don't want to be our friends. They're not trying to integrate into our system. That applies to Xi Jinping, too. They want to undermine or destroy our system, or at least destroy enough countries around themselves that they'll never have to deal with us again. That's the lesson. If we haven't learned that by now, we should have.
So then let's talk about what we can do now. So you mentioned more military aid. Obviously, we need to do more there. There have been some people who've thrown out the idea of a no-fly zone. I think there's very little taste for a no-fly zone for some pretty good reasons, including the idea that if we actually got into some sort of American jet or NATO jet versus Russian jet air war over Ukraine, that Vladimir Putin, who is feeling pretty boxed in right now, if he feels like he's actually going to lose this war, he might actually do something like unleash a tactical nuclear warhead in a war zone. What do you make of the idea of a no-fly zone?
No, I mean, I think it was stupid to announce that we were never going to do it and take it off the table. Remember, in 2008, George W. Bush sailed the U.S. Navy, the Sixth Fleet, into the Black Sea during the war. Okay, the Biden administration took the Navy out of the Black Sea before the Ukraine war. So, in other words, Putin understands security, risk, and reward. That's why the sanctions don't work. He doesn't care about that at all. He understands when he sees the ships moving. So by saying we're never going to do it, well, that just gave him more reason to move in. Now, at this point, of course, it's impossible. There's no political appetite for it. The Biden administration is not going to do it. It's almost silly to talk about it, even though Ukrainians are demanding it, because we all know it's not going to happen. But what I would say is that there are many things we can do on the military front to signal to Putin that he should stop. Okay. And if we allow him to back us down with every nuclear threat, then we're playing into his narrative, and we're allowing him to manipulate the escalation ladder rather than manage it. So that doesn't mean we need to overreact. That just means we need to understand that while we failed to deter Putin from attacking Ukraine, he's still deterred from attacking us. Okay. He's still deterred from attacking NATO. That's why he hasn't attacked NATO, because he would lose that war. He knows that. So at some point, we're going to have to signal that we're willing to defend the things that we really care about. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like Ukraine is one of those things. Now, what we can do for them now is not just the weapons, because I talked to senior Ukrainian officials hiding in bunkers in Kiev yesterday as well, and they said they can't get their banks going, they can't get their services going. They're running out of money. Okay, they need financial assistance, economic assistance. They need services. They need everything. Okay, and so there's a number of different things. Plus, they need diplomatic signals. Why do they have to be begging to get into the EU and NATO while they're under attack? Why don't we just signal something like we're open to that. That's gonna move faster than it was moving yesterday. So again, we can talk about sanctions till we're blue in the face. I think it's just an alibi. It's an alibi for actually engaging in this crisis. Again, short of actually militarily engaging, there's plenty of other tools that we can have: diplomatic, economic, financial, all of it, military supply, and not to mention the intelligence stuff. And as you know, Ben, there's a ton of spooky stuff going on in Ukraine right now too, and we should ramp that up considerably.
We'll get to more on this in just 1 second. First, big tech is just too powerful. You know it, I know it, we all know it. They control what news you see. They control whether you can even market your own products. Big tech is in fact more powerful than most countries are at this point. The way they make most of their money is by exploiting your personal data. It's time to put a layer of protection between your online activity and the tech juggernauts. That's why I use ExpressVPN. Think about how much of your life is on the internet. Sadly, every single site you visit, video you watch, message you send, it gets tracked and data mined. But when you run ExpressVPN on your device, the software hides your IP address, which is the thing that big tech uses to personally identify you. So ExpressVPN makes your activity harder to trace and sell to advertisers. ExpressVPN also encrypts 100% of your internet data to keep you safe from hackers and eavesdroppers on your network. Here's the thing I like most about ExpressVPN. It is super easy to use. So watch this. All I have to do, I open my phone, I find the ExpressVPN app. Boink, right now it is not on, but behold, it is now connected, and now I am protected from the predations of big tech. ExpressVPN does all of this without slowing your connection down. That's why it's rated the #1 VPN service by TechRadar, The Verge, and countless others. So stop handing over your personal data to the big tech monopoly that mines your activity and sells your information. Protect yourself with the VPN I trust to keep me safe online. Visit expressvpn.com/Ben Shapiro Show to get 3 extra months for free. We're speaking with Josh Rogin. His book is Chaos Under Heaven, Trump Xi and the Battle for the 21st Century. He's a global opinion section columnist for the Washington Post. So, Josh, looking forward to what happens from here. There's been a lot of talk about the need to give Vladimir Putin an off-ramp here. Do you think that there is an off-ramp that Putin is going to be willing to take? And if that off-ramp becomes available, what would it look like?
All wars end in diplomacy, okay? At some point, there will be a deal. That deal will be imperfect. Again, see 2008, see 2014. It's inevitable that eventually we're going to have to strike a ceasefire that is not just for the Ukrainians and deal with the outcome of that later. But the question is on what terms and at what point. And, again, I'm not of the school that Putin is a crazy person, because I watch his actions, and his actions are evil but rational. In other words, he's not suicidal. He's not trying to end his own life. He's trying to extend his empire. It seems pretty clear. And he's moving up the escalation ladder pretty deliberately. And at each stage, our response is such that he continues to move up. We should think about that. He's playing a very specific game that we're losing, okay, whether we like it or not. And so all I'm saying is that if you believe that he's suicidal and he's about to nuke the world, then the only rational thing to do is to kill him right now, like Lindsey Graham says, right? But if you don't believe that, and I don't believe that, I think he's evil but rational, then we have to actually show strength. We actually have to do more. We actually have to back him down, increase the costs, and help the Ukrainians to change the calculation in his mind, not just through taking the yacht of some idiot he doesn't even care about in the first place.
So Josh, what do you think are the sort of spillover ramifications for other foreign policy issues? So Russia and China obviously have forged a pretty strong alliance here. China has rejected economic sanctions against Russia. China has its eyes on Taiwan. They sort of see what the world has done here in terms of economic sanctions. China doesn't want those economic sanctions. At the same time, they sort of see the window closing for when they might be able to take Taiwan, because as the West begins to see what the threat is and starts to arm up Taiwan to dissuade the possibility of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, what does this do for the Chinese calculation over Taiwan, the situation right now?
Right. No, I agree with your premise. There's a lot of crazy and stupid talk in Washington now about how China could be a broker in the Russia-Ukraine crisis, about how we need to back off the China competition to focus on Ukraine. Similarly, there's a lot of stupid and crazy talk on some parts of the far left and the far right that we need to abandon Ukraine to put resources towards China, which doesn't make any sense at all because, of course, the struggle against totalitarianism and tyranny is a worldwide struggle. It's all connected. We know that because they say so, because they're working together. And of course, Chinese external messaging is meant to trick us into thinking that, oh yeah, they're not so happy with the Ukraine invasion, and maybe they're going to rethink their alignment with Xi Jinping. But that's BS. That's to deceive and influence, not to inform us. What you said is true. They're a co-conspirator, okay? And that doesn't mean that the Beijing-Moscow relationship is perfect. It means that it's growing and that China is actually the senior partner and Putin is the junior partner. And he's underwriting the invasion and watching the reaction closely. And to be sure, if Ukraine falls, that emboldens Xi Jinping to take Taiwan. Probably not until after he's re-inaugurated for his third term and essentially promoted to deity in the Chinese system. And that happens in November. So what you're going to see is you're going to see the Chinese continue to take this opportunity to get some of the heat off of them, right? You saw Biden's State of the Union speech. He didn't even mention the genocide. No genocide mentioned. That is the genocide on our watch. He didn't mention Afghanistan or Iran or North Korea or Syria either. But just for the sake of this discussion, he focused on Russia and didn't mention China really in any real way. So that's what Xi Jinping wants. Putin's job is to get the world to focus attention on him. Xi Jinping's job is to get the world's attention to focus on anyone but him. And while China is preparing for the invasion of Taiwan, we should prepare to defend it, and we should learn the lessons of Hong Kong, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Tunisia, Nicaragua, and any other democracies that we've let fall on our watch so far last year.
So, Josh, let's talk for a second about some of these spillover effects in terms of economics here. So the West has been hesitant up till now to cut off Russian oil and gas. The Europeans are now actually taking some steps to do so to their own economic detriment. The United States seems far less willing to do so, which is kind of unbelievable given the fact that it's a marginal increase in oil price for us to cut off the Russians, whereas it's kind of a doubling of the natural gas price in Eastern and Central and Western Europe, in parts of it, to cut off Russian oil and natural gas. Meanwhile, the West is taking financial measures against Russia that are warranted on a moral and political level, but could have some pretty interesting sort of long-term ramifications. For example, cutting off the Russian access to assets that are denominated in foreign currency could lead to a mass sort of disinvestment by foreign countries in those assets. Why would you invest in American dollars if those American dollars can get frozen at a bank account in New York as opposed to just buying physical gold? So this could have some pretty interesting ramifications.
Right. Well, I'll address your last point first. You can overuse sanctions. There's risk in every action. There's also risk in every inaction. Eventually, our economic sanction power, it will be diluted. It's inevitable. I say while we have it, we should use it before it goes away. On your larger point, I'm definitely for sanctioning and cutting off all of Russian oil and gas exports, full stop. And, I think the Biden administration has it completely wrong because their calculation is that if we do that, not only will gas prices go up, but the Russians will cut off the oil exports to Europe and Europe will freeze. But what happened over the past 2 weeks should inform everybody who has that view that that's not actually how things are playing out. First of all, basically the winter's almost over and Europe probably has enough gas and oil to get through the next couple of weeks. So the threat is way down. Second of all, what we've seen is the private sector divesting from the Russian oil and gas sector. Shell, BP, all these companies are completely vitiating all of their agreements and their joint ventures with Russian companies. Why are they doing that? Because they understand in the long term it's the only sane thing to do business-wise, not war and diplomacy-wise, business-wise. Why? Because the Russians are proving to be unreliable energy suppliers, if you haven't noticed. Okay, so the only real smart long-term play is to dump them all and get rid of them all and crush them all. And that's a mix of, increasing our LNG exports, increasing our domestic production, increasing our transformation to new forms of energy, all of it. And if this war doesn't bring that into stark relief for all Americans, what would convince you that being dependent on Russian oil and gas is a terrible thing, not just for our souls, but also for our wallets?
That's Josh Rogin. Again, he's a columnist for Global Opinions section of the Washington Post. You should check out his book, Chaos Under Heaven, Trump, Xi, and the Battle for the 21st Century. Josh, really appreciate the time and the insight.
Anytime.
We're in a battle for the culture and for our values. Like and subscribe to help keep our videos on the front line of the fight and top of your feed.